I'm Jim Clark, Visual Arts Manager here at Hopkins Center for the Arts. We're speaking with Shari Albers about her exhibition, The Widow Series, on view now through June 21st, 2025 in the Upper Lobby Gallery. Shari, welcome.
Thank you.
All artists' work is personal on a spectrum, one level to another personal. Yours is intensely personal. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about the origins of the series?
Yes. When my husband passed away, I became obsessed with writing. I just wrote. I dissected our marriage. Maybe some of you recognize that in your own. It's like I just wrote about everything, and then they started to become chapters. And I was working with I used to workshop children's picture book stories, and so I took them to my workshop, and Jane Rush Thomas, who was our mentor, said, "You've got a book here." And so I really concentrated on that, and that was from 2013 to 2015 or 2018. And in 2018 I did a women's art intensive program at St. Catherine's College, thinking that maybe it would inspire me to do some artwork for the book. I had no idea of what I was looking at doing, and about a week in, these self-portraits started coming. I had no idea, I had no plan. And the first self-portraits are the rose bushes and the house, hugging the house. Those were the first two pieces that came about. And then the mice came about. So I got those three pieces done during that month long, and then it just exploded into 17 more.
As I understand it, you had an established practice of graphic journaling. Mm-hmm. That, as you put it, you track changes in your body. Is that's fair to say that those are your words?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But this work didn't directly spring out of that, because at the time of your husband's passing, you kind of pivoted to purely writing.
Yes.
Yes. And what drove that choice, do you think?
Well, I had been writing.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to that. I'd been writing for children. And I'd write in my journal. As Jim mentioned, I had a practice of drawing myself in my journals. From the time I was probably 19 or 20. Drawing facial expressions. I had specifically liked life drawing in college. Mm-hmm. I loved working on the body, and I found that drawing myself helped me feel more comfortable with myself. And as I changed, and actually when I was a teacher, I had my students also do self-portraits often. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And switching to writing as a way to process through and record your experiences, at what point then, and you maybe touched on it with the mentor that suggested you had a book there, but mm-hmm. How did it go from the writing back into visual art making?
It happened at that St. Catherine's art intensive. Mm-hmm. What I did was I took parts of my writing on a piece of paper, and I would put it below the drawing that I was working on. And these all started as sketches, and then they became drawings, these first three. And I had no intention of putting the words on the artwork. And then we had a professional critic come in, and she saw that. She goes, "You've got to put those words on the art." And our mentor, Pat Olson, said, "No, you can't. Art needs to speak for itself." And there was this argument in front of my artwork, and I was pretty shy about it, and it went back and forth, and in the end I decided to do that. I had already finished the house hugging one on a cold press paper, so it was really rough, and so I had to do it all over again on a hard press paper in order to do the lettering afterwards.
Did it ever? Did you consider at any point applying the letters on a different paper stock, or was it important to you that they were all on the same surface?
That sure would have made it a lot easier.
And easier isn't always the right answer, but
No.
I was curious.
No, I didn't. It's like I started with these two paintings, the house and the rose bushes, and it's like I was obsessed. I was obsessed, after my husband died, and I just decided everything's going to be the same, and I'm going to have the art stick out from the, from these rectangles, and I'm going to take that chance and write on the bottom of each of these, and I didn't screw up too badly.
It's certainly not. I mean, what would constitute a screw up?
Well, this isn't a writing screw up, but here's a good example here. I finished this, and I was just finishing with the red on my eyes, and I hit the paintbrush and put a big chunk of red over here. And I just started falling apart. Kristen, what am I going to do? And we kind of talked it through, and it became an opportunity. It's much better with that mouse there.
Has your practice always embraced those opportunities, or
No.
was that something new?
No. I probably would do something all over again.
Was this the first time that happened?
No. And it happened again with a few of these others. That one stands out because it was the first, but I just learned to fit it in.
Sure.
To make it work.
Sure. As far as the text in how it relates to the image, did you pull elements of text from your writings and say, this is a drawing, or did you start a drawing, discover what was going on with it, and then kind of excavate text from your journals that was appropriate or activated the image in some way?
Good question. I mostly did the first technique that you talked about. I went through the writing, and I found, this will be a good image.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. A couple of them may have gone the other way. I don't remember really anymore. But generally,
it's possible it went different ways.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Or even in a case, I don't remember the specific one, where I'm working on these, and I usually worked on 3 at a time. I had 3 easels set up, and it's not like I'd go like this, but I'd work for a while, and then I'd go to this one, and they were always inspirational to me. And there was a time when I thought of an image and I didn't have the text for it, so I made it up.
It's brave to say that, and it's fantastic.
It's true.
Are you willing to share which one it is, or would you prefer not to?
I think it was the Camino one, because that was a more recent activity, and I thought it would be a good image. So I don't think I had written that part yet. Mm-hmm. There may be others, but I don't remember right offhand.
Does it feel any less true to your experience, or because from an objective viewer standpoint, it's a very consistent body of work, and I don't think anyone would notice that. But do you feel a difference?
No. It just came together. Mm-hmm. It just came together in the way that it did. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we set a goal. I have an arts group, and a couple of them are here, and I said, I think I'll try to do 9. And one of my colleagues said, let's make that 12. And it was like, 12. Geez. And by that time, I had an exhibit scheduled at Artistry, so I knew it was supposed to be in 2020. And I knew I had time. And I ended up then, no, we'll try for 13. And then it was just a big joke, because eventually it was 17. But that's how it developed, how it got bigger.
So this series has been shown in town at other places, but we do have some work here that this is the first time it's been shown, and it deviates from the form factor and structure that you'd given the other work.
Yeah.
We've got a large unstretched canvas painting and then the suite of 9 panel works. How did those come about? Because they also are part of the series, but they're significantly different, and offered a curator a nice variety of punctuation visually. Were you thinking about that?
A little. The unstretched canvas, I'd never done anything like that before, and I was working big was wonderful. And so I just thought, I'm going to try something different. And I must admit, I cried the most working on that one. That was really a hard one to do. These over here, I have painted since January. And the idea just came to me, Steve isn't really here. This is my story. But I know that other people who've lost loved ones have to go through their stuff. And I looked through his stuff that I still have, and that was the inspiration for those. And I could have done another 9 easily, but that's what got done since January. So, but I was thinking of how to change the exhibit, something different, something new.
Are you continuing to build on this series even now?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm going back to the picture book I was working on when Steve died. It's about eagles. But I don't know. Working on those 9 just kind of came to mind. It's like it percolated for a long time. And then it probably percolated for a couple of months, and then I started, and then I couldn't stop.
In your practice, do you have periods of, I'm going to say inactivity, but what I mean is you're not touching brush to paper or maybe pencil to paper, but you're thinking about conceptually?
Yeah.
So you don't stay consistent with your making practice, but you go through spurts of making and spurts of mulling over?
I wish that I did have that regular practice, and I don't. It's just not part of my schedule at this point. So yes, I have these periods of mulling, a lot of mulling.
Yeah, for sure. Do you work on other work while you're working on this series that unrelated?
I was a graphic designer, and the muse was the challenge and the money. It was a whole different approach than this is. And I don't do that too often anymore. Working on other things, yes, I do, but nothing has grabbed me. Nothing has provided the muse that this project did. This was, I understand the muse now more than I ever did.
The subject matter brings with it a real charge. I mean, they're devastating images and ideas and captions, but then there is maybe the less expected humor and lightness. Were you yourself surprised by those moments?
I was. It's a good, yeah, I was. But there was humor in grief as well. You know, it like the day there was a huge storm a few months after Steve died, and I went to open the basement window, and the first one kind of didn't work anymore. And then I went to the second one and it fell apart. And then I went to the third one and that one just totally fell apart in my hands. And I just sat there and laughed. It was like so bizarre. Like, how could this happen? Mm-hmm. And then I had a car accident. I bought a new car with his insurance money. 3 months later, we run into a deer. It was like, and I've talked to other widows that they have car accidents, you know, spaciness, unfocused, that sort of thing. And so you have to laugh at it. It's so weird.
Yeah. Has it helped you work through this period?
Yeah. You know, people will say it was great therapy. And it's interesting. It was great therapy. Writing was great therapy. Going on the Camino was great therapy. I went for any kind of therapy I could to come to peace with what had happened. Mm-hmm. And but it's interesting because now it becomes a project. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that there's no emotion attached to it, but it is a project. And you know, doing those 9 things, I mean, it's very intimate, those objects. But they were a project. I set 9. I was going to do 9. And that was it.
But it continued to grow.
Yes.
And were the payoff from the objects beyond your original 9, did they remain consistent? Did you feel a similar sense of accomplishment? Yeah,
I did. I'd say I you know, each one varies where I get stuck. Mm-hmm. But there's always that end, you know, how do you know when you're done? And
a lot of people here want to hear your answer.
Yes, please.
Yeah, all these artists here. Yeah. What I found with this, more so than with any of my freelance work, is I knew I was getting close. It was really hard. It was so hard. And things weren't going right, but I just kept going and going. And then all of a sudden, there was this moment of, I think I am nearly done. Does that resonate with some of you? Yeah, okay. And you don't really necessarily know it's right there.
Have you ever got to the point where you felt you were done, mm-hmm. put it in a frame, maybe even showed it, and then came back to it and was like, yeah, you know, I need to...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But I haven't taken anything apart yet.
Okay.
But I might.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do you plan to pull it all together and actually publish a book?
Do I plan? I think about it. I am encouraged to do it. Mm-hmm. I have exposed a lot of myself here. The book, the manuscript is a lot more exposing, but it's no different than, you know, Joan Didion's, or I name a big writer, but the other books. I read a lot of books about death and survival after Steve died. Joan Didion and Joyce Carol Oates and Elizabeth Alexander, they were all my bedside companions as I read. I wanted company who had the pain that I felt. And so I know that these touch people. At the first exhibit of the 3 at St. Kate's, when we were done with the program, women came up to me and cried. And I knew then, that I had touched people. And that was powerful, and it's powerful every time it shows up. So I think the book also could be there. My mentor, Jane Rush Thomas, edited it for me. I went on a trip, and she edited it for me while I was gone. And when I got back and we were going to meet, she called me and she said, "Shari, could you take me to the ER instead?" And she died a few weeks later. The good thing is that in the ER, we talked about the book. It was great, and she was really ill, and so it's just sat there. I've got all her notes. I haven't even looked at them. I can't look at them. So like all of these things, maybe it'll just take some time. But the mentor, our mentor at St. Kate's, Pat Olson, has published some books of her art with stories, and she's encouraging me to do the same.
You mentioned authors that were important to your process. Visual artists. You call out Alice Neel and Frida Kahlo, both pretty intensely personal. Are there other artists that have inspired or influenced you?
The art intensive that I took for women focused a lot on art history and the women who were not in our art history that we've studied. And so like Cindy Williams and Kiki Smith and people I'd never heard of before, I saw the work that they created. And then also going back to the Middle Ages, women who were illuminating manuscripts. I didn't even know there were women illuminating manuscripts. And the men were already inserting themselves into the illustrations, and the women were too. I didn't know that. And that was inspirational to all of this too. And you know, the Frida Kahlo and Alice Neel really confront the viewer with their art. And I felt a strong urge to do that as well, to look at the viewer. Yeah.
There's a certain ambiguity or open-endedness, at least that I feel when looking at a number of the images. Is that something that you intended, or is that just my thing?
What do you mean?
Well, the image with Gussie, for instance. You were going through the freezer and found Gussie, and we don't know Gussie. It's just a package in your hands. It's a name. The title is Boa, and so you're kind of coaxing an understanding or a certain closure for the artist, or for the viewer. But you're not holding our hand through it, and we're kind of left to make our own assumptions. So I imagine leaving a certain gap was important to you?
Yeah, it was, in that particular one, yeah. And it was humorous. So I was really playing on that. My husband was a science teacher, and so we had a lot of animals, and we had a boa constrictor, which I wasn't real fond of, although I got used to her climbing around on me. Our children, everybody who came by. And when she died, luckily she died a year before Steve did, otherwise I would have had to go and get the frozen mice and all of that too. But she died, and I didn't know what he did with her. The day she died, he came, I was working at my desk, and he goes, "Gussie died." I said, "Oh," and he goes, "You want to see her?" I said, "No." And he said, "Well, she died all curled up, and I want to keep her skeleton in that position." And so we sat and talked about toothpicks and clay and how we could, you know, but then I don't know, he never did it. And she just went in the freezer. And she's still in the freezer.
Now.
Yeah, she's still in the freezer.
And I think as a viewer, we sense that whole story through the image, your expression, and the connect the dots between that ambiguous caption and the title, and we kind of construct it ourselves and get to a spot. Do you feel like that was, and here, in front of a bunch of friends and strangers, you told us a story, but is there a certain protection involved in that, or do you just like keeping a little bit for the viewer to imagine?
Leave a little to the viewer. Yeah. It's fun to hear the stories people come up with. You know, the mouse one at the opening. You know, a couple came up to me and they're like, "Oh yeah, we're at number 17 or something like that." You know, or how people relate to these different paintings, these different images.
When you hear the viewers' responses and they approach you and say, well, this is what I get from this one, or I see this, or I relate to this in this way, have there ever been times that you kind of bristled and said, well, that's not really what I wanted someone to get from that?
No, that has not happened.
And could you imagine that, or you're of a personality and an artist that you're just looking for people to engage?
That would be more like it. If it happens, it happens.
Yeah.
And I'll be ready for it.
Sure.
It was interesting at the opening. I met a young couple, and the young man was talking about loving the layout, the way it's done, and he said he's a graphic artist. Of course he would. That makes good sense. It was like we were right on the same page then. And he said, I love the story. I love the story, I follow it, you know, and that was a wonderful connection, you know, because I think of this as a big storyboard in a way. And not everybody will get everything, or they'll get what they get out of it, or what they see.
Let's open it up to questions.
Would you say a little more about the muse that you now know well because of these paintings?
Oh, I'm hoping for another, but not that kind. I just had this obsession to create. You know, I'm not a regular artist probably like a lot of you. I've been making art all my life, but I never really had the muse. I mentioned my muse as a graphic designer was the paycheck and the challenge. I loved the challenges that I had in all the jobs I had. This is different, and it was different in that, you know, I started spreading out these easels, and this obsession of working late, working in the morning, working, being inspired by myself in a way, to tell my story, because my story is everybody's story who's lost someone. I mean, bad stuff happens and good stuff happens, and you have to adjust your life. So it's everybody's story at some point or another. And so, yeah, the muse was survival, basically, or finding balance again.
I've got a question for you. When you mentioned putting up 3 easels or maybe working on multiple things at one time, do you work on like everything within a chapter at the same time, or do you work more in like anecdotes, like this was a great story and this is a great part? Do you kind of work chronologically or completely just what is in the moment?
It's pretty anecdote. I can't say it. It's as it comes. It's just as it comes. I can't say that one thing necessarily led to another. It's just what caught my attention at that time. I was mentioning earlier to people in the front here about the chainsaw. It was like I was working on something else and I don't remember what. And all of a sudden I thought, a chainsaw. This is great. I call up my neighbor and I said, you have a chainsaw? And so we went out there. I obviously didn't cut that tree down myself. I hired Bratz Tree Service to do it. But this is the exaggeration of it.
That brings up a good process, a question that I had wondered about. Being as their self-portraits, do you work from a mirror next to the easel? Do you work from photographs? Do you work purely from your imagination, experience, and memory of yourself? How does that work?
It's all of the above. I took hundreds of selfies, hundreds, sometimes just of my hand. I took selfies looking in the bathroom mirror. I had mirrors all the time, though. I had mirrors here, you know. And then sometimes it's just out of my head. I mean, I know this nose. I know these wrinkles well enough that I can draw those without looking in a mirror. But I did use selfies.
Yeah.
This is very powerful work. I cried seeing it. It just touched me in a place that not many things do. Was there a point at which you realized how much power you had put into this show? Or are you still kind of coming to grips with that as more people are starting to see it and give you feedback that obviously you don't get in your studio?
Well, as I said earlier, it was when they were first exhibited at St. Kate's. We had an exhibit of all of us who had been part of the program. And I had these people around me that I didn't know this would happen. And that's when I discovered my power. And then it's continued on.
How did you sustain it then?
Well, I didn't go off limits, I don't think. I sustained it by forming this art group. 2, 3 are here. That kind of mimicked what we had done at St. Catherine's. And we meet monthly, and they sustain me. As I said, I set a limit, or not a limit, a goal to do 9 paintings, and then they challenge me. So that sustains me.
I know you have an essay coming out in an anthology that speaks about the history of women artists doing portraiture. Before and after you wrote that essay, did you learn about your own relationship to your own motivation to do it and to the history?
The motivation to do the art or to do the writing?
To do portraiture in your work.
I can't really even say where the portraiture came about. It just did. And I would think it was really inspired by the art history that we studied at that time. I've always been a fan of Frida Kahlo and Alice Neal. So that's where it came about. I can't pinpoint a specific place.
Did it feel good to know you were, in your own way, hooking into this long history of women artists?
Yes, I did. I wrote an essay when the show was at Artistry. I wrote an essay about self-portraiture, women in self-portraiture. And what George is talking about there's an anthology coming out by the University Press in like October, I think it is, of aging artists. It's called In the Nick of Time. And my essay is about women in art history and portraits and how it influenced what I did. Yeah.
Hi. Could you explain a little further? When I saw this, I thought this was a complete, finished wonderful book. But are you using these as illustrations in another larger piece?
No, well, not at this time. It's something I'm considering.
Because for me, I wanted a copy of this to give to my family, because then they would understand. They would understand.
It's all on my website. The entire show, except for those 9 new ones, they're not on there yet, but everything else is on my website. And the first chapter of my book is on the website as well.
This is kind of personal. I knew your husband a little bit. And so you made the comment earlier, Steve's not here, this is your story. But I'm wondering if Steve could see your paintings. Is this also a reflection of your marriage, that he would get the humor, that why you did those things? Is there any of Steve here that would resonate with him?
You are so right on, yeah. He would laugh. He was very supportive. I just wish we could have a conversation about this. I really do. He was such a cynical character, and it'd be great to have that conversation, but it's not there.
This is maybe a comment versus a question, but when I look at this, I see like some of them are more emotional and some of them are more practical. And I'm kind of curious how that laid out. If you found at the beginning that there was more a kind of the emotional reaction to some of these pictures, and then the practical, like the rose bushes or whatever.
That's a great question, actually. What I did was I went through my manuscript. As I was saying to Jim earlier, it's like I went through the manuscript and I'd read it. I'd read like chapter headings and stuff like that and think, oh, this would be good. But I was aware of that some was practical, some were practical, and some were more exaggerated. But it wasn't really, I noticed that, but I didn't plan it for what this is.
And I just wanted to say one other thing, because I have a son who was widowed in his 30s, very young. And I'm aware that part of me being drawn to this is his experience, and that I think he could relate to all of this as a male, but it would be so meaningful for him.
It was interesting at the opening, 3 different men came up to me and were real emotional about it. Mostly it's been women. Yeah.
One of the things I see definitely is a feeling of a comic book still, down to the immediacy of the image, but then also even your writing is like this uppercase comic book type lettering. And, comic stills are so often these fantastical stories of people with superhuman abilities who can do things, and yet ordinary life is enormously complex in its own way, especially this process around grief and grieving. And when I walked through, what I saw was I found myself wanting to make a narrative in the way they were placed here along this wall, like this one, like as if I'm looking at the stages of grief or something. So I was curious if you could talk a little bit about the way that it's laid out. Did you give a say as to like, I want these ones to be here? Or is it as simple as these ones look good together?
This has been exhibited 3 times in 3 different galleries, and I always hand them the chronological list. And I just let them choose what's best. And I love what Jim and the others did here. It's not chronologically totally, in some ways it is, but I know what you mean about the comic book thing. Yeah. I'm fine just letting them go with what works best. At the last exhibit, my friend, who's an artist and helped hang it, said, let's put all the blue ones together here in 3, and then let's do these there. It never occurred to me, and it looked great. But maybe the story suffers. I don't know. I don't think so, though.
Related to that, idea, have you found that your experience with the loss and how you processed it, was it linear? Or did it have kind of cyclical fallbacks and push forwards?
Yeah, cyclical. Definitely cyclical. I took a course on Elizabeth Kubler-Ross way back when. I knew the 5 stages of grief, and I found that they all happen, but they don't happen in that order necessarily, and they happen over and over in different ways.
Maybe primarily it was an explanation or an offering of reasoning for my curatorial choices, which were to balance both the visual aspects, but also potentially recognize and acknowledge that it's not a linear process.
Yeah. Well, and it's not. Yeah. So, I was just stuck on the chronological as I was working on the chapters in the memoir. It was all chronological. So but I find it refreshing to see it moved around in different ways.
Shari, thank you so much for sharing your work with our community.
Thank you.